They say the most dangerous storms come without thunder. Just the sky going still, the birds falling silent, and the air thick with something unspoken. That's how it felt the moment she looked at me, my daughter, sitting across from the lawyer, as the words, "You've been removed," landed like glass shattering on stone. And in that frozen second, I finally saw what I had been looking for all these years. Recognition. Not just any, but recognition of the woman who made her, fed her, and took care of her. The one she had erased. But let's not start there. You've got to hit the subscribe button now, because what's coming next will not just send chills down your spine, it'll show you how much power neglect can give. She didn't even flinch when the lawyer said her name. That was the first red flag. Melissa always flinched at her own name, always responded with just the right tilt of her head, the right press of her lips to make herself seem composed. It was a performance I'd watched for 34 years. But not this time. She blinked, just once, slow and careful, and then looked at me. Not with anger, not even confusion. No, what I saw in her face was something colder, calculation interrupted. Like a chess player whose queen had just been quietly taken off the board. The lawyer kept reading. In accordance with the revised will dated January 17th of this year. And just like that, the air in the room changed. Melissa sat straighter. Her hand, adorned in a diamond-heavy ring that had always looked more like debt than elegance, slowly curled into a fist. She was beginning to understand. I watched the pink in her cheeks drain out, bit by bit, word by word, until she looked like she had walked in from a snowstorm, white, brittle, stunned. I didn't speak. That was part of the power, the silence. Let the paper speak for me. Let the decisions I had made in the dark now do the heavy lifting in the light. But inside, my heartbeat was a steady drum. Not with fear. Not anymore. With a sort of adrenaline I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes when a woman stops apologizing for existing. My lawyer, Janet, had offered to read the statement aloud herself. I had declined. I wanted Melissa to hear it from someone neutral, sterile. I wanted it to sound official. I wanted it to sound like law. Not vengeance, not spite. Just cold, clean fact. Janet continued. To my daughter, Melissa Ann. Having reached a point of reflection and clarity, I have come to understand the difference between legacy and obligation. I leave you no financial assets, property, or material inheritance. My life's work, savings, and home will instead go to a foundation supporting women rebuilding their lives after familial estrangement or abandonment. Melissa didn't breathe. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I watched him glance sideways at her, probably wondering if now was the time to intervene, to ask for a recess, to protest. He didn't. He knew better. I stared at my daughter, this woman I had carried, nursed, bathed, read to. The child I had fought for in school offices, sat up with during fevers, stood beside when her first boyfriend broke her heart. And now, this stranger who had once called me her rock was looking at me as if I'd just become a ghost. She swallowed hard. Not a word passed her lips. Janet finished reading, paused, and looked to me for a nod. I gave her the smallest one I could muster. Any more, and I would have shattered the delicate tension in the room. Melissa leaned forward slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. You're serious? I said nothing. She blinked again, slower this time. You actually went through with it. Still, I didn't speak. Not out of cruelty, but because anything I could say would have been a mercy. And mercy was for the people who asked for it before the war started, not after the smoke cleared. Her lawyer, poor man, cleared his throat. Perhaps we can revisit this outside of formal reading. There may be legal. There won't be. Janet's voice was crisp. Ms. Callahan had every legal right. All paperwork is in order. Notarized, witnessed, dated. We are not here to debate. Melissa's mouth opened like she might protest, but all that came out was a hollow little exhale. The kind of breath someone takes when they finally realize they've built their castle on sand. I didn't smile. God, I wanted to, but I didn't. Because this wasn't triumph. This wasn't revenge. This was grief. Quiet, final grief. The kind that doesn't cry or scream. It signs documents. It hands over keys. It walks out the door without looking back. I'd grieved her long before this day. I'd grieved her the first time she told someone I wasn't really involved in her life. I'd grieved her when she posted a wedding album online and cropped me out of every shot I was in. I grieved her when she stopped asking how I was and started treating me like a fragile artifact to be boxed away when inconvenient. But today, she wasn't the one doing the boxing. I was. She stood up too fast, knocking the chair back. Her hands were trembling now, just slightly, the tremor of a woman who finally understands she no longer holds the pen. You cut me out, she said quietly, like a tumor. I looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time in years, I let the hurt rise to the surface, just enough for her to see it. No, I said finally. You did. She stared at me, lips parted, fury behind her eyes, but there was no rebuttal, only memory. Of all the times she left me waiting, of all the times she needed money but not my presence, of all the times I wasn't invited, wasn't asked, wasn't acknowledged. I didn't remove her. I simply stopped pretending she was still there. She walked out of the room without another word. No hug, no goodbye. Just the soft knock of her designer heels across the tile, her presence fading like perfume in cold air. The door clicked shut behind her, and I let out the breath I'd been holding since the day she told me, "You're not really part of this anymore, Mom." Oh, but I was. Just not the part she expected. It started with a cake. Not a wedding cake, not some grand fondant-covered spectacle. Just a store-bought vanilla cake with thick white frosting and too many candles jammed into it. My 65th birthday. Nothing monumental, not a milestone. Just a Tuesday with a number attached. Melissa was late. Not surprising. She'd been late to most things since her early 20s, baby showers, funerals, my gallbladder surgery. But that night, something about her absence felt heavier. Like the air in the house was warning me. She walked in with her sunglasses still on and a phone glued to her ear, laughing at something I wasn't meant to hear. Her coat hit the back of my couch, her designer bag found the table I had just cleared for dinner, and she barely glanced at me before mouthing, 5 more minutes. So I waited. Like I always did. Like I had at the parent-teacher conferences, at the college graduation she barely invited me to, at the boutique bridal fitting where my name never made it on the list. When she finally hung up, she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, like you'd give a stranger who'd saved your seat. "Sorry, work's been insane," she said. "You wouldn't believe the contracts I'm juggling right now. I swear I haven't sat down all day." She said it like it was a compliment to herself, like her chaos was currency I should envy. I smiled, polite, measured. The kind of smile you learn to craft when being warm stops working. I served the pasta she used to love, simple, creamy, with a sprinkle of nutmeg the way Tom used to make it. She didn't touch it, just picked at her phone, texting under the table with the subtlety of a teenager. "You know," I said carefully, "I've been thinking about scaling back. Maybe selling the house, donating some of the heirlooms, closing a few accounts." That got her attention. She looked up. "Why would you do that?" I shrugged. "I'm tired, Melissa. Tired of holding on to things no one wants." She laughed, soft and dismissive. "Mom, don't be dramatic. You just need something to focus on. You always get like this when you don't have a project." A project. That's what I had become. A project when she needed support. A problem when she didn't. She stabbed her fork into the untouched pasta and twirled it once. "Just wait until after the wedding. Everything's nuts right now. We'll get you settled then. I promise." I nodded, the way one does when a child promises to clean their room. Empty words dressed as care. "Speaking of the wedding," she said, sliding her phone onto the table, "Victoria thinks it's best if we keep things simple. You know, streamlined. She's organizing most of it. Daniel's family has very specific expectations." "Do they?" I asked, my tone quiet, unreadable. She didn't catch it. She never did. "They're used to a certain caliber. You know how appearances matter to them. It's nothing personal, just we're trying to keep the aesthetic clean. Family tables, elegant flow, minimal interruptions." Interruptions. She backtracked, too quickly. "I mean in the program, speeches and stuff. You'll still be there, obviously. But Victoria suggested we maybe skip the formal mother of the bride moment. Keep it modern." Keep it modern. Translation. Keep it marketable. Keep it photogenic. Keep the woman who raised her hidden just out of frame, behind the curtain with the other stagehands. I didn't say anything. I just stood and cleared the table while she scrolled through menus on her phone, searching for a second dinner to order. Something trendy, probably vegan, probably twice the cost of the groceries I'd used to cook. As I scraped her untouched meal into the bin, something in me shifted. Not snapped. No, it was quieter than that. A dull, clean break. A line drawn not in anger, but in bone-deep exhaustion. Later that night, after she'd left with a passing kiss and a vague promise to check in soon, I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and stared at the box beneath my bed. It was cedar. Old. Scratched in places. Inside were letters, photos, a locket that had belonged to my grandmother, the deed to the house, my wedding ring, and a copy of the will, old, unsigned, still naming Melissa as the sole heir. I sat on the edge of the bed with the document in my lap and read every line slowly, like a contract written in someone else's blood. It was all so automatic, this idea that she would get everything. Even after years of absence, of eye rolls, of whispers to friends that I was emotionally fragile, she still stood to inherit every dollar, every brick, every thread of my legacy. And what would she do with it? Sell it. Package it. Bury it beneath imported rugs and minimalist furniture, and tell guests it was just some old house her mom used to live in. My life, reduced to used to. The next morning, I made 2 calls. One to Janet, the estate lawyer Tom had trusted, and one to myself, silent, internal, absolute. No more waiting, no more hoping to be seen, no more asking to matter. Melissa's inheritance ended the moment she told me, without blinking, that my opinion didn't. She just didn't know it yet. The first time I truly saw Melissa's other life was in a thumbnail. A photo, square and glossy, on her wedding website. White background, golden serif font, carefully curated images arranged like a magazine spread. There she was, laughing with Daniel on the steps of some ivy-covered estate they'd chosen as the venue. A vineyard, of course. There were no photos of me. Not in the Meet the Bride section, not even in the childhood collage. There was a snapshot of her dog, a paragraph about her mentor from business school, a long, overly sentimental blurb about Victoria Brantley Bricks, Daniel's mother, but not a single line about me. When I asked her about it, calmly, over the phone, pretending I hadn't noticed, she said, "Oh, don't take it personally. It's just branding." Branding. That was how she said it, as though the erasure of my presence was a strategic decision made by a marketing team. And maybe it was, in her mind. Maybe, somewhere between self-help podcasts and champagne brunches with Victoria, she learned to view her history as something editable, something to curate. The version of her that the world would see was spotless, ambitious, polished, and completely unburdened by the mother who taught her how to tie her shoes and balance a checkbook. So I stopped asking, stopped offering suggestions, stopped checking in on her planning, stopped sending her photos of dresses I thought might work, stopped pretending that I was part of it. The silence didn't bother her. That was the real heartbreak. My absence fit her narrative perfectly. I became a footnote she didn't have to write. And still, I went through the motions. I showed up to her bridal shower, wore the outfit she picked for me, beige, of course, because it photographs well. Sat in the back while Victoria led games I wasn't invited to participate in. Watched as Melissa introduced her to guests as her second mom. Victoria basked in it, like a cat in a sunbeam. She always had the aura of someone who lived in perpetual lighting, like her entire life was a carefully lit stage. Even her apologies sounded like compliments to herself. "Oh, Susan, you must be so proud to have raised a woman who fits into our world so well." Our world. I smiled through clenched teeth and counted the seconds until I could leave without drawing attention. On the way out, I saw Melissa posing with Victoria for a photo in front of a flower wall. She caught my eye, gave a quick wave, an afterthought, and turned back to her scene partner. The camera clicked, and the memory was sealed without me in it. I drove home in silence, didn't turn on the radio, didn't call Carol, though I knew she'd pick up on the first ring. I just drove and listened to the sound of my own thoughts echoing in the quiet. It was the sound of something soft dying inside me. The next morning, I returned to Janet's office with a revised document in hand. She read it silently, her eyes scanning the lines with careful precision. "You're sure?" she asked when she finished. I nodded. "I'm not doing this to punish her. I'm doing it because I need to stop living like I'm waiting for someone to remember I exist." Janet looked at me, not with pity, but with the kind of respect that only comes when someone finally starts telling their own truth out loud. "Then let's sign it," she said. It took 2 minutes, a few strokes of a pen, a notary's stamp, a handshake. And suddenly, 34 years of assumed inheritance vanished into ink. Melissa's wedding was 23 days away. Every inbox notification, every voicemail from the planner, every passive-aggressive group text from Victoria was another small match tossed at the dry edges of my patience. But I played along, because that's what I was trained to do. Nod, smile, be useful, not heard. Then came the phone call. I was slicing apples for a pie I hadn't been asked to bring when the screen lit up with her name. Melissa. My thumb hovered for half a second before I answered. "Hey, Mom," she said, breathless, the way people are when they want to sound busier than they are. "Listen, I need your help with something, but quietly." I waited. She didn't skip a beat. "So, there's been a small change to the seating chart. Nothing major. Victoria's just trying to make everything flow better, visually, you know?" I put the knife down. "You were originally at table 3 with Daniel's extended family, but we've shifted things a bit. And now you'll be by the terrace, near the fountain. It's more private, intimate. Private, intimate." I could already hear the music from the euphemisms. Next to the kitchen. Or worse, the restrooms. Maybe the trash bins again. That old trick. I cleared my throat. "You mean I'm not sitting with family?" A pause. "Don't make this into a thing, okay? It's just a seat. Just a seat. It's always just a seat until you realize you're not invited to the table at all." She kept going. We just need everything to photograph well, that's all. You understand. So I said nothing, which is worse than yes. It's dangerous. Are you there? She asked. I heard you. She sighed like I was the problem. Can you just be chill about this? I'm really stressed. I could have said a dozen things. Could have reminded her that I paid the deposit for the caterer when Victoria's credit card bounced. That I wrote the florist a personal check when the venue upped the minimums. That I sold Tom's antique watch, his last real heirloom, to pay for the custom invitations she just had to have. But I didn't. I said, of course. And that was the last straw I gave her. That afternoon, I pulled out the receipts again. Not out of bitterness, out of necessity. I laid them across the dining table in a neat row. Catering, paid half. Flowers, deposit only. Bar service, not a dime yet. Cake, on hold. Music, contracted but unpaid. Venue, half paid, my half. They were all still pending final payment, and I held every thread. It was strange how calm it made me, seeing it all in ink, proof that I wasn't a guest at this wedding. I was its spine, quiet, unnoticed, but holding everything upright. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the house instead, past the photos of Melissa on the stairs, her graduation cap, her sweet 16, her toothless kindergarten grin, past the spare bedroom she hadn't stayed in for over 3 Christmases, past the armchair where I used to wait up for her, pretending I wasn't terrified every time she came home late. Around 3 a.m., I stopped in the hallway outside my own bedroom, staring at the mirror. There I was, still me, just older, just quieter, just more erased than I used to be. I whispered something to the reflection, something I hadn't allowed myself to think out loud before. You don't owe her your dignity. The next morning, I made more phone calls than I had in years. I called Catherine at the catering company first. She was brisk but polite until I said my name. Then her voice warmed. Of course, Susan. Everything's on schedule. We just need that final payment by the end of next week. I hesitated. Let it sit in the silence. Then, there's been a change. She paused. What kind of change? I won't be authorizing the final payment. Silence again. I'm sorry? I won't be covering the remainder. Please mark the account as unpaid unless someone else handles it. Mrs. Callahan, you understand what that means? I do. I repeated the conversation with the florist, the bar service, the cake decorator, all of them professional, surprised, but compliant. After all, I wasn't breaching anything. I was just not finishing what I'd started. Melissa always said I didn't know how to follow through. She wasn't wrong. Until now. When I hung up the last call, the house felt different. Not colder, not emptier, but clearer. Like it had finally exhaled. No one would know, not yet. Not until the day arrived, when the vendors asked for payment and Melissa looked around for me, the shadow in the wings. The woman with the open wallet and closed mouth. But by then, I'd be gone. I wasn't going to play mother of the bride. I was going to play something else entirely. The only role I had left. The woman who leaves just in time. The next day, Victoria called. She never called. She didn't like getting her hands dirty with conversation. But that afternoon, she did. Hello, Susan, she said, the kind of voice you use with employees or dry cleaners. I just wanted to touch base ahead of the rehearsal dinner. Touch base. As if this were a corporate merger and not my daughter's wedding. We've finalized the program, she continued. We've kept things streamlined, no formal parental speeches. Less is more, don't you think? No speeches. Of course not. Melissa had promised I'd get a moment. Just a few words, a toast even. But that was before Victoria decided what clean lines, and aesthetic flow meant. Also, Victoria added, we've adjusted the seating. You'll be with the officiant and the band coordinator. Lovely people, very open-minded. Not family, not even guests. Staff and side characters. I said nothing. I know Melissa would have told you herself, but she's swamped with the final details. She really values your support. Support. A currency they accepted in silence. Never receipts, never acknowledgement. I'll see you Friday, she finished, and the line went dead before I could respond. Not that I would have. That night, I opened the cedar box again. The pearl necklace lay inside, wrapped in a handkerchief stitched by my great-grandmother. The same necklace I wore when Tom and I danced under paper lanterns on our wedding night. He had fastened the clasp with shaking fingers, whispered, "Now you look like someone worth remembering." I'd spent months restoring that necklace, had it cleaned, restrung, even resized. It was meant for Melissa, a part of her lineage, a thread connecting generations of women who made something from nothing. But she didn't want pearls. She wanted branding. I held the necklace in my hand and watched the way the light caught the curve of each bead. It looked too delicate to survive what it had. Much like me. I didn't put it back in the box. I placed it on the windowsill, next to the stack of vendor contracts and the letter I had drafted for Janet to notarize. A letter that started with, "In the event of further erasure." It wasn't a threat. It was a record. A final artifact of someone who had been written out so thoroughly that all that remained was her signature. On Friday, I arrived at the rehearsal dinner on time, in beige. I smiled when spoken to. I posed when directed. I ate the cold chicken and complimented the wine I hadn't chosen. When Melissa floated by, laughing with Daniel and his college friends, I waved. She didn't see it. Victoria stood at the center of the room like she owned oxygen, directing servers and snapping at Ainsley about a missing table arrangement. I watched her reorder the entire layout in real time and erase me with the precision of a scalpel. At one point, Melissa came over to adjust something at the head table and caught my eye for half a second. Just half a second. Enough to smile. But not enough to speak. Not enough to see me. When the toasts began, my name was not on the list. I sat in silence, next to the officiant who smelled of cologne and passive guilt, and listened to everyone else speak of love and legacy and gratitude. Not one mention of the woman who had taken out a second job to pay for violin lessons. Not one word for the woman who pawned her wedding ring so her daughter could study abroad. Not one sentence for me. At the end of the night, someone handed me a favor bag, filled with artisanal jam, and a thank you card, signed only by Melissa and Daniel. Thank you for your presence. Not your love. Not your sacrifices. Not even your name. Just your presence. As though I were a light bulb or a chair. I took the bag home, placed it next to the beige dress, and stared at both until the sky outside turned the color of ash. Then I picked up the phone and made one final call. To the photographer. The only vendor I had paid in full. "I'm calling to update the contact for your gallery access," I said. "Of course, Mrs. Callahan," she replied. "Who should we list?" "No one," I said, calm and clear. "You'll send them to me. Only me." I didn't need to be in the pictures anymore, but I would own the negatives. The wedding was 3 days away when the final version of the guest list was sent out in a group email. I wasn't even on the main thread. Ainsley must have forwarded it to me by mistake. There it was, in elegant serif font, arranged like royalty. The Bricks and Callahan wedding, a celebration of love and legacy. The word legacy made my mouth go dry. Table assignments were listed at the bottom, color-coded, with little star icons denoting family of honor. My name wasn't marked, not starred, not bolded, just tucked in beneath Overflow, East Terrace. 2 rows above me, Victoria Brick's Pilates instructor plus guest. I reread it twice, thinking it had to be a mistake. It wasn't. The terrace, I now knew, was a quiet euphemism for out of the shot. A place where people too close to the truth, or too far from the image, were gently exiled. Not banished, just set aside. Like a chipped plate or a photo frame with a crack you turn toward the wall. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't call. I didn't cry. Instead, I printed the guest list and folded it neatly into the envelope that now held the updated copy of my will. A clean record of where I stood, literally and metaphorically. The next morning, I visited the cemetery. I hadn't been since last fall. Not because I forgot, but because I couldn't stand the silence anymore. Tom's grave was exactly how I'd left it. Simple, clean, and a little too far from the main walkway. He hated fanfare, even in death. I sat on the bench nearby and laid my hand flat over the stone. "She doesn't want me there," I said out loud. "Not really." A crow called from the tree above, like punctuation. "I think she likes the version of me she's created better. Quieter, grateful, decorative." Tom didn't answer, of course, but the wind shifted, and for a second, I let myself imagine what he'd say. Probably something pragmatic. He always saw through people, especially Melissa, even when I wouldn't let myself. "She's not cruel, Susan," he'd say. "She's scared. Scared that you remember the parts of her she's trying to forget." He'd be right. He usually was. That night, Carol came over with Thai food and red wine. She'd seen the guest list, of course. She always did her digging. "She put you at the overflow table," she said, poking at her noodles like they'd insulted her personally. "Next to the DJ's assistant and some guy named Trent with a silent P in his name." "I know." Carol narrowed her eyes. "And you're still going?" I took a sip of wine before answering. "I want her to see my face when it falls apart." There was a pause. Then Carol leaned forward. "What did you do?" I didn't smile, but I wanted to. "I did exactly what she taught me," I said. "I edited the story." She stared at me like she was seeing something new, something sharp. "I stopped the payments," I said. "All of them." The silence between us stretched, taut and full of meaning. "You what?" She doesn't know it yet, but when the caterers ask for the balance and the florist doesn't deliver and the bar refuses to serve past the first round, she'll know. She'll know exactly what it costs to pretend I'm invisible. Carol dropped her fork. It clattered against the table. "She's going to lose it." "I hope she does," I said softly. "I hope for 1 second she feels what I've felt for the last 2 years. Then she can build from there." Carol exhaled, a long breath she'd probably been holding for months. Then she raised her glass. "To payback?" "No," I said, lifting mine in return. "To truth." We toasted in the quiet. Outside, the wind picked up, pushing dry leaves across the porch like old secrets. The pearls sat on the windowsill, catching the light like they were waiting for the right moment. Not for Melissa. For me. The sky was perfect that morning. Of course it was. Not a cloud in sight, just clean blue stretching across the vineyard like someone had ordered good weather for appearances. It was the kind of day people frame in albums, crop and filter until it looks like a fairy tale. But I knew better. I knew what waited underneath. I parked my car at the far end of the gravel lot, well away from the lineup of black SUVs and polished sedans. They gleamed like mirrors in the sun, all of them just shiny enough to reflect back the lie Melissa was determined to live in. From a distance, the venue looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Draped white tents, strings of tiny lights, crisp folding chairs. I recognized every detail because I had paid for most of them, The orchids imported from Chile, the gold-rimmed chargers, the soft jazz trio tuning their instruments under a canvas canopy. Money made things look weightless, even when they were anchored in guilt. I walked slowly up the path, heels catching on loose stones. I could already feel the eyes of staff trained to smile through anything, though none of them looked directly at me. Just a breeze of polite nods and practiced courtesy. That's how the rich like it. Acknowledgement without attachment. Ainsley found me first. She was dressed in all black, clipboard in one hand, an earpiece tucked discreetly under her blonde hair. She looked like a funeral planner moonlighting as a wedding coordinator. "Mrs. Callahan," she said, too brightly. "So glad you could make it." Her smile twitched at the corners when I didn't smile back. "Your seat is just through there, past the west tent," she continued, gesturing vaguely behind the main area. "We've set up a beautiful view near the koi pond. Very peaceful." Peaceful. That was the word they gave to people they wanted removed, like eased out, or retired, or seated in the shade. I didn't say a word, just nodded once and walked in the direction she'd pointed. The path to my table was lined with hydrangeas and crushed shells. Someone had taken great care to make it look expensive, not beautiful. It smelled like floral arrangements and credit limits. My table was small, round, set for 4, though only one name card was visible, mine. The other places were blank, placeholders for people who weren't real guests. Staff, probably, or overflow cousins that didn't RSVP. I sat down and waited. The music began, soft and slow, and the crowd rose to their feet. Phones angled, whispers hushed. Melissa began her walk down the aisle, Daniel waiting at the end like something pulled from an advertisement. Flawless, forgettable. There was no toast for me, no mention, no nod to the woman who had written the first chapters of Melissa's story. I was just part of the scenery now. One more detail to be photoshopped later. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Because I knew what was coming. They moved to the reception tent for dinner, laughter and clinking glasses echoing across the lawn like background music. I waited. I watched. I counted down the minutes. At exactly 5:43 p.m., the catering team began to shift. It started at the back, kitchen staff pulling crates from beneath tables, unplugging warmers, folding aprons. One of the servers whispered something to Ainsley. Her smile faltered. 3 minutes later, Victoria stood up from her table and marched to the tent entrance, her voice sharp, urgent. Melissa followed, a veil of confusion over her carefully contoured face. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew them. "There's been a mistake. We haven't received payment. We can't serve." I watched from my seat as the staff packed food back into vans. The bartender capped the bottles. The waiters disappeared like smoke. Within 15 minutes, the entire reception had unraveled. Guests looked around with hungry, irritated eyes. Children whined. Old men checked their watches. The band kept playing, too loud now, like they were trying to drown out the cracks forming. Melissa was speaking to someone on her phone, pacing, her free hand in a fist at her side. Then she looked up. Our eyes met across the distance, across the lawn, across years of silent hurt. And for a moment, everything stopped. She walked toward me, slowly, controlled. Her heels dug into the earth like she wanted to break it. I stayed seated. "Did you do this?" she asked. No hello, no preamble, just accusation, raw and panicked. I tilted my head. "Do what?" She blinked. Her lip trembled. "The food, the drinks. What is happening?" "You tell me," I said. "It's your wedding." Her voice cracked. "This is your fault." "No," I said calmly, standing now. "This is your reality, Melissa. I just stopped hiding it. She stared at me, furious and crumbling. You embarrassed me. I nodded slowly. Number I showed up exactly where you put me. Quiet. Out of the way. Next to nothing. She didn't speak. I didn't ruin your wedding, I said. You did that when you decided I didn't matter anymore. And for the first time all day, she had nothing left to say. I didn't go home right away. After Melissa turned and stormed back toward her chaos, dress flaring like some tattered white flag of war, I stayed in my seat, hands folded neatly on the table, letting the silence expand around me. People were still murmuring inside the tent, confusion swelling like a balloon ready to burst. Waiters were gone. Plates still sat empty. And Melissa, who had never truly learned the weight of a consequence, was finally discovering that something doesn't stop just because you shout at it. I watched the unraveling from the edge. Not gleeful, not smug, just still. It's a strange kind of peace, the kind that settles over you once you realize there's nothing left to lose. The photographer came out of the tent, her camera hanging limp at her side. She glanced toward me with that same soft expression I remembered from our first meeting, the one I liked, the one that didn't pretend. She approached slowly, like I was a fire she wasn't sure had burned out. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she said gently. I didn't know they moved your seat. I looked up at her, tired but calm. I know. I asked about you at the rehearsal, she continued, voice low. They told me you didn't want to be in the photos. I thought it was odd. Because it was. She hesitated, then held something out to me. A flash drive. Small. Silver. She placed it on the tablecloth next to my untouched glass of champagne. These are your photos. From the bridal shower, the dress fitting, the rehearsal dinner. I saved them separately, just in case. My throat tightened. She didn't wait for thanks. She just nodded once and walked away, back toward the tent full of smoke and mirrors. I held the flash drive in my palm, warm from the sun. Real moments, preserved for someone who was never supposed to remember them. Eventually, I stood up. My legs ached, my back pulled. The kind of pain you get when you've carried more than your share of a story. No one stopped me as I walked toward the gravel lot. A few guests lingered near the exit, their polite confusion turning to whispered speculation. A woman in a navy cocktail dress and pearls glanced at me, looked away, then looked back with the slow recognition of someone realizing they've just misjudged an entire person. But no one said a word. At my car, I paused and looked back at the vineyard. Melissa was nowhere in sight. Victoria, however, stood near the edge of the tent with a clipboard and a cell phone pressed hard to her ear, barking into it like she could scream money into existence. She caught sight of me, just for a second, and her face twisted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't fear. It was humiliation. She knew exactly what I had done. She just couldn't say it out loud, because saying it would mean admitting that I'd mattered, that I'd held the reins the whole time while they paraded around in someone else's fantasy. I drove in silence, windows cracked, wind dragging fingers through my hair. The flash drive sat in the cup holder, glinting softly. When I pulled into my driveway, Carol was already waiting on the porch with 2 glasses of wine and a look on her face like she'd been sitting on dynamite all afternoon. Tell me, she said the moment I stepped out of the car. I handed her the flash drive. Start with these. She blinked. What is it? Proof. She followed me inside. I kicked off my shoes, unzipped the beige dress and stepped out of it right there in the hallway. Left it crumpled on the floor like the napkin it was. I changed into a cotton robe, the kind with sleeves too long and pockets too deep, and made tea while Carol plugged the flash drive into my laptop. She clicked through the photos silently, Images of me holding Melissa's veil at the fitting, adjusting the hem of her dress, pouring lemonade into mason jars at the shower, laughing at something one of the servers said. Real, unscripted moments. The kind Melissa never bothered to post. She made it look like you weren't there at all, Carol said softly. I wasn't supposed to be, I replied. Not in her version. We sat at the kitchen table, the wine untouched, the tea going cold. I looked around the house I'd kept up for 34 years, the walls that held every version of Melissa. Toddler, student, teenager, woman. The couch she cried on after her first breakup. The bathroom where I used to braid her hair for school. The guest room where unopened boxes of her old trophies and report cards still sat like relics in a forgotten museum. I'm listing the house, I said finally. Carol blinked. What? I'm done holding space for a daughter who refuses to see me. She didn't argue, just reached for my hand across the table and squeezed it once, gently. Then let's find you somewhere new, somewhere warm. Later that night, after she left, I poured myself another cup of tea and opened my laptop again. I started writing. Not a letter to Melissa. Not this time. A letter to the scholarship fund I'd been drafting in my mind for months. I named it the Second Thread Foundation, for women starting over, after giving too much for too long. The seed money would come from the house, from Tom's savings, from the inheritance that Melissa had once believed was her birthright. She wasn't in the will anymore. She wasn't in the story I was telling now. She had her legacy, just not mine. Let her build her future without the scaffolding of my sacrifice. Let her discover what her name is worth when there's no one left to sign the check. The phone rang 3 times before I answered it. I wasn't going to at first. I'd been ignoring calls all morning. Numbers I didn't recognize. Some from out of state. One that was unmistakably Victoria's. Too polished, too pointed, even through caller ID. But this one was Melissa. The ring had a weight to it. Like it knew it was the last one I'd pick up before something in the world shifted again. I let it buzz in my hand until the 4th ring, then pressed accept. She didn't speak right away, just breathed, shallow and shaky. In the background I could hear movement, doors slamming, maybe an engine running, maybe someone else's voice, muffled and tense. Mom, she said finally. Just the word, nothing attached to it. No tone, no sweetness, not even the usual passive performance. Just a name she hadn't said properly in months. I didn't answer. I need to come over, she said quickly, as though she were afraid I might hang up. I need to talk, please. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't defiance either. It was something in between. The awkward, breaking down kind of voice that meant the image had cracked and her reflection had finally betrayed her. I said only this. The door will be unlocked. She arrived less than 20 minutes later, still in the bones of her wedding dress. The lace looked wrong in daylight, limp and tired, speckled with grass stains at the hem. Her hair had come loose in places, one shoe missing, one eye smudged to shadow. I hadn't seen her like that in years. She walked in like she had once lived here, which she had, but never really as an adult. That was always the illusion. She grew up, but she didn't grow back. Not to me. Do you have tea? She asked, already heading toward the kitchen like it was muscle memory. I boiled water in silence while she sat at the table. Not her usual seat. Not the seat she claimed through habit and history. She sat across from me. Deliberately. Like she understood the rules had changed. When I placed the mug in front of her, she didn't look up. Just stared into the rising steam like it held answers. She held the mug with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly. I didn't know it was you, she said finally, staring down. I didn't hide it. You didn't sign anything. No emails. No warnings. You didn't ask. Her face flinched, just barely. A tiny betrayal of that practiced exterior she always wore so well. It's chaos, she said. Everyone's furious. Daniel's mother is threatening to sue everyone. The venue, the vendors, even the planner. And Daniel. She trailed off. Didn't finish the sentence. What about Daniel? I asked, though I already knew. She swallowed. He left. After the guests started going home and the bar was closed and there was no food, he just looked at me, like he'd never seen me before. Then he said, "What did you expect?" and walked out. I let the words settle. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't rush in to comfort her. She was not a child needing soothing. She was a woman tasting consequence. I gave you everything, I said, my voice level, even. I gave you my time, my money, my name on every contract, and you treated me like a bank that had the audacity to speak. Her eyes snapped up, wide, raw. It wasn't supposed to go like this. No, I said. It wasn't. We sat there, both of us suspended in the air between truth and aftermath. I thought I was building something beautiful, she said, more to herself than to me. I thought if I could just make it perfect, it would mean something. You were building something hollow, I said, and you used my silence as the foundation. She winced, but didn't deny it. I kept waiting for you to see me, I continued. To call, to ask. Not for help, but for me. You never did. You invited my wallet and left the rest outside with the caterers. She covered her face with both hands and breathed hard, shoulders trembling. I waited. I'd waited for years. I could wait a little longer. When she looked up again, her makeup had run. She was just a girl now, tired, scared, without the armor of performance. I'm sorry, she whispered. It was late, but not too late for that sentence. I don't know what happens now, she said. That depends, I replied, on whether you want to rebuild or if you're just looking for another place to hide. She nodded slowly, like someone finally reading instructions after years of winging it. I'm not in your will, am I? No. She didn't look surprised, just sad. And the pearls? They're mine again. She nodded. Her hands gripped the mug like it was the last warm thing she had. Then what do I do? I stood, walked to the old drawer in the sideboard, and pulled out a blank envelope. I set it in front of her. You write, I said. Not to me. Not yet. To yourself. You write every ugly, beautiful thing you've done. And you decide if you want to be the version of yourself that left her mother in the shadows of her own life. Or someone else. She nodded again, slower this time, understanding it wasn't a punishment. It was an invitation, a rare one. She stood, left the tea untouched, and walked to the door. Her dress whispered across the floor, the fabric limp with rain and regret. She paused before leaving. I miss when things were simple. I didn't say it aloud, but I thought it anyway. They were never simple. You just never had to look at who made them so easy for you. Then she was gone. The house was too quiet after she left. Not peaceful, not calm, just hollow. Like sound didn't want to touch the walls anymore. The kind of silence that made you notice every creak in the floor, every soft hum of the refrigerator, every breath that felt a little too loud. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the door clicked shut. Her mug of untouched tea still steamed faintly beside mine. I didn't move it. I let it sit there, cooling, fading, a ghost of a conversation we should have had years ago. Upstairs, her old bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it. I had never been able to bring myself to change it. Not because I thought she'd come back, at least not then, but because it felt like erasing her would be admitting she'd already erased me. But now, the logic had shifted. I climbed the stairs slowly, not out of pain, but out of deliberation, a kind of emotional pacing. The door was closed, the doorknob cold. I opened it, and there it was, the past, boxed up and untouched. Trophies from middle school, a shelf lined with books she used to love, a bulletin board cluttered with old birthday cards and high school dance tickets, curling at the edges. And in the corner, an old trunk. I knew what was in it. Letters. Dozens of them. Every note I'd ever tucked into her lunchbox. Every birthday card. Every little scrap of handwriting she'd once thought was worth keeping. She had saved them. Even after everything, she'd saved them. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the trunk, the scent of paper and old perfume hitting me like a memory. There were crayon drawings folded into hearts. A picture she'd drawn of the two of us holding hands beneath a sun that had a smiling face. A letter I'd written the day she left for college, tucked into her suitcase when she wasn't looking. My handwriting was smaller then, tighter, less tired. I read through a few, not out of nostalgia, but out of grief. Not for the daughter I had lost, but for the woman she never let herself become. Not yet. She'd wanted the world to see her as refined, untouched, flawless. But this room said otherwise. This room remembered the mess, the effort, the reaching. It remembered me. I stayed there for hours, not moving, letting the weight of time settle around me. By the time I stood, the light had gone golden, and the dust in the air looked like something holy. I knew then I wouldn't stay in this house. Not because it held pain, but because I was no longer a keeper of relics. I had spent too many years curating a life I wasn't allowed to fully live. A museum of motherhood, without even a plaque with my name on it. Downstairs, I opened the drawer in the desk where I'd kept all the financial documents. A thick folder marked Estate waited patiently. Inside, everything was ready. The house sale was pending. The foundation paperwork filed. The will updated. Melissa's name didn't appear once, and it wouldn't again. I left it all on the kitchen table, where she had sat hours before in her ruined dress, asking me what came next. She didn't need to know the answer yet. But I did. Later that week, I met Carol at the cafe downtown. She was waiting at our usual table, 2 cappuccinos already steaming, a knowing smile tugging at her mouth. "You look lighter," she said, as I slid into the chair. Carol didn't ask questions right away. She waited. She always knew when I needed space to unfold. "Melissa came by," I said finally. "And?" She cracked, a little. The pieces didn't fall apart the way she thought they would, but they moved. Carol sipped her drink. What did she want? Everything she threw away, but she didn't know how to ask for it. Carol nodded slowly. "Do you think she meant it?" "I think she meant to mean it." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We didn't say anything else for a while. Just sat there, 2 women who had built families from blood and willpower, now learning what it meant to build lives for themselves instead. After lunch, I stopped by the community center. I had a meeting scheduled with a woman named Janelle, mid-30s, mother of 2, recently divorced, starting over with nothing but a borrowed car and a GED enrollment form. She'd heard about the Second Thread Foundation through a friend. She was nervous when we met. Sat with her hands folded too tightly in her lap, like she was waiting for someone to tell her no. I offered her tea. Told her my story, not all of it, just the parts she needed. That I'd started over too. That I knew what it meant to be invisible in a room you paid to be in. That sometimes the first thread you pull isn't the one that unravels you, but the one that finally sets you free. She cried a little. Then we filled out her paperwork. When she left, she hugged me so tightly I had to steady my feet. That night, I came home and packed a single box. Not with things I wanted to keep, but with things I was ready to let go. A stack of old programs, guest lists, a napkin from Melissa's engagement dinner, the beige dress, still creased and silent. I folded it neatly into the bottom and closed the lid. Outside, the stars were just starting to show. The house, for once, didn't feel sad. It felt like something had finally ended, which meant something else could begin. 2 weeks passed before Melissa tried again. Not a call, not a visit, a letter. A real one, ink on paper, sealed in an envelope with her name in the return corner, like a relic from a time when we still meant our words. I found it wedged in my mailbox between a coupon for dog food and a postcard from the mechanic. Her handwriting had changed. More rigid now. Controlled. Like even the pen didn't fully trust her. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the counter, next to the keys, and stared at it like it might do something on its own. Move. Burn. Breathe. I made tea, swept the kitchen floor, folded a blanket that didn't need folding. Anything to delay the moment when that envelope became real. Eventually, I sat down, tore the flap open slowly. The paper inside was thick, expensive, the kind you buy when you think sincerity can be printed on texture. It started with Mom, not Susan, not Mother, just Mom. Like she remembered something softer, something from before the edits and the silence. She didn't beg. That surprised me. She didn't defend herself either. She wrote about the aftermath, the family fallout, the sudden emptiness of a life built on perception. She told me Daniel had moved in with a friend, that Victoria had stopped taking her calls, that she hadn't been sleeping. And then, near the end, a line that didn't look like her at all. I'm starting to wonder if I've ever really been kind to anyone without wanting something back. It landed like a stone in water, heavy, sinking. Because that wasn't self-pity. That was the beginning of truth. I placed the letter face down and stared at the table. My tea had gone cold. The room felt different somehow, fuller, like the ghost of who she might have been had returned to sit across from me. She was unraveling, but in the right direction this time. And I didn't know what to do with that. Later that night, I sat on the porch with Carol, wrapped in one of the old quilts I hadn't packed away yet. The sun had dipped behind the trees, casting everything in that strange golden hour glow that makes you feel like you're dreaming awake. She wrote, I said, handing Carol the letter. She read it slowly, lips moving silently, brows drawn in that furrow she got when reading something that needed her full concentration. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. So she's circling the truth, I said. But circling isn't landing. Carol nodded. You going to respond? I already did, I said, surprising myself. She raised an eyebrow. I wrote her months ago, in every decision, every withdrawal, every silence. I already answered. The wind rustled through the trees then, carrying the scent of earth and rain, and we sat there for a long time, neither of us needing to fill the space. The next morning, I received a call from Thomas, my lawyer. She's contesting the will, he said without preamble. Or rather, Victoria is. Melissa hasn't said a word, but Victoria's team is arguing undue influence, claiming you're not of sound mind. I laughed before I meant to. It startled even me. Do they think memory loss is contagious? Thomas chuckled too, low and dry. They're not expecting to win. They're expecting to exhaust you, to scare you. They should have tried 10 years ago. I'll handle it, he said, but it might get loud. I can take loud, I said. What I won't take is being erased in silence. That evening I pulled out the folder again, the one marked Legacy. I opened it and reread everything. The will, the scholarship documents, the mission statement. I read the lines until they blurred, not from confusion, but from certainty. This was mine. Not because of what I'd lost, but because of what I'd chosen. Then I pulled out a blank sheet of paper and wrote something new. Something not legal or formal. Something only she would read. I told her the truth. That I had loved her so deeply it had made me forget myself. That I had built her a life with my bare hands and then stood back while she redecorated it in someone else's image. That I didn't walk away to hurt her. I walked away because staying had become a form of self-destruction. And at the very end, I wrote, I will always love you, but I can't carry you anymore. You have to build your own spine now. I sealed the letter and placed it in the drawer. Not addressed, not sent, just waiting. In case she ever asked for something more than forgiveness. In case she ever asked for understanding. A week later, the news broke. The story of the wedding, photos, interviews, anonymous sources. The article was brutal and beautiful in equal measure. The title read, The Mother Who Vanished and Took the Wedding with Her. The journalist had done their homework. Vendor statements, guest quotes, even a blurry photo of me sitting alone at the overflow table next to an empty champagne bucket and a trash bin. But it wasn't the photo that went viral. It was the last paragraph. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. The difference between being a guest and being the one who built the house. And the quiet, devastating grace it takes to walk away from a door you paid for but were never allowed to open. Melissa didn't call. Not after that. Not when it aired. Not when the comments poured in. Not when Number Team Mother trended on social media. Not when people started sending letters to my lawyer, asking how they could donate to the Second Thread Foundation. She stayed quiet. But that was fine. Because for once, the world was speaking for me. The lawsuit collapsed faster than I expected. Victoria's legal team withdrew after one letter from Thomas, a blunt collection of receipts, signed contracts, and a notarized will that left no room for interpretation. There were no loopholes to squirm through, no emotional appeals to manipulate. Just ink, dates, terms, my signature, clear and final. The only real response came from Melissa. A handwritten note. No envelope this time, no stamp. Just folded paper on my doorstep one morning, held down by a single white rose. I stared at it for a while before picking it up. Not out of dread, but out of a strange, almost maternal sadness. The note was short. I'm done trying to fix what I never saw was broken. I'm going away for a while. Please don't look for me. No name, no apology, just a quiet retreat. For the first time in our shared history, she didn't ask me for anything. I sat on the porch steps with the note in my lap and the rose between my fingers. It had started to wilt, petals curling at the edges, its stem bent slightly, as if it had been handled too hard on the way over. I wondered if she'd picked it from her bouquet, the one that should have crowned her wedding day, but instead ended up forgotten in some cooler after the guests left. I didn't cry. I didn't sigh. I just sat there and watched the morning sun roll across the lawn like nothing had happened. Like the world still turned, still bloomed, even when daughters disappeared into silence. Later that day, I began packing for real. The new house was almost ready. A small ranch outside of town. Just 2 bedrooms, a porch with a swing, a garden big enough for tomatoes and maybe some sunflowers. I'd chosen it deliberately, modest, low maintenance, full of light. A place not built for legacy, but for living. I labeled every box, not with what was in them, but with what I felt about what was inside. Grief, letting go, memory, enough. One by one, I filled them and stacked them by the door. The beige dress went in the lesson box. The pearls stayed with me. That evening, Carol came over with takeout and a bottle of cheap red wine. We ate on the living room floor, surrounded by half-filled boxes and the echo of lives we used to live. She told me about a book she'd started. Fiction, for once. I told her about the woman I'd just awarded a scholarship to, single mom of 4, going back to school for nursing. Carol raised her glass and said, "To the version of you that finally picked herself." I clinked my glass against hers. Not delicately, not carefully, with intention. The next morning, I delivered my resignation letter to the school district. 35 years. No farewell party. No retirement banner. Just a handshake from the superintendent who looked vaguely uncomfortable, like maybe he knew something he wouldn't admit. Back home, I stood in what used to be Melissa's bedroom. The walls were bare now. The trunk of old letters closed and moved to the attic. I stared at the space, and for a moment, I saw her again. 7 years old, dancing in socks across the wood floor. Laughing. Spinning. No idea how heavy the years would be. I whispered something into the empty air. "Wherever you go, I hope you find yourself." Then I closed the door. The moving van came 3 days later. The driver was kind, called me ma'am, but not in a patronizing way. Handled my boxes like they were breakable, which they were. I followed behind in my car, the back seat full of garden tools, blankets, and a print of Tom's favorite painting, something abstract and blue. When I arrived at the new house, it smelled like new paint and wood polish. It didn't smell like her, and that was a blessing. I walked from room to room barefoot, letting the floors creak beneath me, letting the silence stretch and settle. There were no pictures on the walls yet, no signs of who lived here, just a woman in the middle of her own second act. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, no rush. The next morning, I stood in my small backyard with dirt under my nails, planting roses. Not the white ones from the wedding, but yellow ones. Bright, defiant, honest. A robin landed on the fence post nearby and watched me, head cocked. I nodded to it. We were both rebuilding nests in our own way. By the end of the week, I'd hosted my first book club at the new house. Just 6 women, 2 bottles of wine. Laughter that filled the corners of my new life. Not one of them mentioned Melissa. Not because they didn't care, but because they knew that was a name still shedding its old skin. That Sunday, I wore the pearls. Not because of tradition, not because of legacy, but because I wanted to. They rested on my collarbone like a promise I made to myself, one I would keep. And then, a letter arrived. Not from Melissa. This one came from Daniel. Typed. Neat. Careful. He thanked me, said he was sorry, that he saw now what I had done, not out of cruelty, but clarity. He wrote, "I think your daughter's still in there somewhere. Maybe this was what had to happen for her to finally meet herself." He ended with, "If she finds you again, I hope it's as 2 women, equal, honest, and free." I placed the letter on the mantel, beside a single framed photo of myself. Just me, smiling, no one beside me. And for the first time in a long, long time, that was enough. The first frost of winter arrived like a secret. Quiet, silver, softening the edges of everything it touched. I woke before sunrise, wrapped myself in a thick sweater, and stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea that steamed against the cold air. The grass sparkled. The garden looked like it had been dipped in stars. Even the roses, now brittle and bare, stood tall like they were proud of what they'd survived. Inside, the house was still. No footsteps overhead, no old memories slamming doors or whispering from the walls. Just the ticking of a clock and the warmth of a space that finally belonged to no one but me. I stood in the middle of the living room and let the silence wrap around me like a second skin. There was no grief in it anymore. No ache. Just stillness. That sacred kind. The kind you earn. I'd mailed the final set of documents to the foundation office the night before. The second thread fund was official now, fully endowed, legally structured, and set to award its first round of scholarships by spring. Women would walk through doors I had once stood in front of for years, waiting to be noticed. I had turned my closed chapters into keys for someone else. Melissa hadn't written again. I didn't expect her to. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some stories end not with a door slammed shut, but with the quiet understanding that no one's coming through it anymore. And that's still an ending, a valid, honest one. I thought about her sometimes, not with pain, but with distance, like a character from a book I'd once read too many times, whose pages I finally stopped dog-earing. I hoped she was healing. I hoped she was becoming. But I wasn't waiting for her anymore. Later that day, I joined Carol and the others at the cafe downtown. We talked about books, laughed too loud, shared stories we didn't have to edit to fit anyone's expectations. When I mentioned I might take a painting class in the spring, they clapped like I'd just declared a revolution. And maybe I had. On the way home, I took the long route, past the vineyard. The tent was gone now. The grass had grown back over the places where chairs had once sunk into the earth. Nothing remained of that day but memory, and even that, I was letting go of. That night, I wrote one final entry in my journal. Today, I remembered who I am without permission. Today, I didn't measure my worth by who stayed. I chose myself. And it was enough. They say some storms don't come to break you, but to clear the path. Mine didn't arrive with thunder. It came in silence, in beige dresses and unsent invitations, in a daughter's voice that forgot how to say thank you. But in losing what I once lived for, I found something else entirely. Myself. Not a version edited for someone else's story, but whole, honest, unhidden. I don't need applause. I don't need to be remembered in someone else's scrapbook. I just need my own name, my own peace, and the life I built with both hands. And that's enough. Thanks for spending time with this story. If it resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Someone else may need to hear it too. Watch another real-life journey by clicking on the left, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.